Welcome to the latest episode of 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. That's our Discord server, $2.99 per month. Get you access to 11 different channels, including our regular stage shows, which we do not put on the podcast feed. So if you want to interact with us there, you can do that on a regular basis. Again, check it out. It's Off the Floor, $2.99 per month. Use the link in the description. Click it all the way through. You'll bypass the Apple upcharge. Also, check out the great sponsors. The 5 Reasons Sports Network includes a special sponsor of this particular episode. That's Underdog. Use the code 5. You know that code. And you get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. So use the code 5 at Underdog. You can download it wherever you download your apps. And you can play players higher and lower. We know Tyler Hero's on a tear lately. That number's been coming up a little bit towards 23.5. Still want to play it over. You can. Maybe you want to play Dru Smith over. He might make it on the board. Also, you can check out the app for lots of other things on other sports and other ways to play. So check it out. It's Underdog. Here's the deal. Again, download it using the code 5 for up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. But you must be at least 18, 19 in Alabama or Nebraska, 19 in Colorado for some games, 21 in Massachusetts or Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. If you're concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. And now, today's episode.
Down to Biscayne. Yikes. 5 on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing rubber frogs. Just like Bucker said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust.
You sound scared.
It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
All right, welcome back to 5 on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and at 5 Reasons Sports. I got Alex Toledo. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. Of course, you can check our coverage from the games. Alex and Brady are at every game. I'm at most of them. We're going to be back on Thursday. For those who have not updated their schedule, the Heat have added 2 games. Well, the NBA added them for them because they are not in the in-season tournament, but they need to get to 82 games this year. So Thursday against Toronto at home. And Detroit, I believe that one's in Detroit on Monday, I think. And then OKC is back on the schedule. Well, that was always on the schedule. On the 20th, they come into Miami. But, Alex, before we get into today's topic, which is going to be about Dru Smith specifically, and we're hoping to actually have Drew on the podcast this week, so just a little bit of a tease there. This was supposed to be the roughest stretch of the schedule. We talked about this yesterday. We're talking about this with Brady at the game as well. That this 6-game sort of death march, well, they're 4 games into it, and they're 3-1. They lost to Boston. Okay, I mean, you lose to Boston on the road. There's no great crime in that. Of course, a lot of players were out in that game, not just for the Heat, but also for Boston. But they've beaten the Lakers. They've beaten Phoenix. I know Durant didn't play, but still, Booker and Beal were on the court. They beat Phoenix. And now they come off a win against a team that has been the best team in the league for most of the year, which is Cleveland. And now they get this separator before the rest of that sort of death row. Like they get Toronto and Detroit, which are 2 winnable games. So instead of coming out of this, I mean, I said they might be 1-5 in these 6 games. They're already 3-1. They might be 5-1, knock on something, before they even finish this thing up. They still have, I guess, OKC. And one of the games, Orlando, they just lost Franz Wagner, who without Paolo has been their best player. And again, we'll see when Paolo comes back. So Miami has a chance to kind of put themselves in much better position. And we're looking at the standings right now. And I said last night, I'm like, stay ahead of Milwaukee and hope Orlando falls with all of the injuries. But there is a path out of the play-in at the very least right now. And one of the reasons they're playing better is they have not only gotten better play from their top 3 who have been connected better of late, and they move Rozier to the bench, but they've also found complementary pieces to their top 3. So 2 things are really working there. One is the starting lineup, which has been, since it was put in, our guy Rohan had tweeted this out, It's since they've been using it, it's been the best lineup in the league, putting Highsmith and Duncan, who's been playing very well of late, with Hero, Jimmy, and Bam. But then also using Dru Smith as a core rotation piece off the bench. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But to you, what is the single biggest factor in them playing better of late, before we get to Dru specifically?
Oh, man, I hate to say it because I don't want to take away from what they've been doing. This has easily been their best stretch of basketball this season, most impressive stretch when you consider some of the opponents here. But one of the biggest factors here that, I think they were able to come out on the other side looking so good is some injury luck, man. Like the fact that Kevin Durant just happened to get injured, not that long, a few days before that game. Now, like you mentioned, like the Magic with their whole thing where like they were winning at still like a really high rate without Paolo, to lose Wagner now. And, you might have Paolo back for at least one of those 2 games. We'll see. But like these are the types of things that help in a stretch like this. But honestly, basketball wise, I feel, the defense has been a little bit better. I think that's kind of, that's something that I've been saying for the past few years, like just in the Jimmy era, when they're playing defense, they're playing their better brand of basketball because their offense is typically not good enough to rely on without some consistent defense. And I think, their game plan is one that's, throughout all the different coverages and the way that Spo cycles, the game plan stays the same. It's just executing in a different way. The game plan is always, keep the other team stars, like just keep them contained, right? Try to have them play below their standards. And then maybe as a result, you're giving up bigger games to some of their role players. The Heat have done this for a long time. And I think just frankly, they've been executing that game plan much better as of late. You saw it last night with the way they held Mitchell in check. He had a really bad game for his standards. Garland was fine, but I thought Mitchell had just a very poor game for what you expect of him. Then you saw, the night before with Booker and Beal, I think they were like 11 of 34 from the field combined. They had, they just combined for a pretty bad night for themselves. And, even with the Suns being like 1-6 or 1-7 without KD heading into that game, that was still one that you can't take for granted if you're the Heat. Like you gotta, because honestly, like the book on them has been, okay, you're beating up on the Hornets, you're beating up on the Raptors, right? So even if the Suns are not winning with Kevin Durant, that team frankly has a lot more talent without Durant, and just and guys who are just better right now, right? It's not like a lot of young players that you're projecting out for. It's guys that are, playing in their prime right now, and they got that win. And then to go follow that up with what they did last night, second night of a back-to-back, best stretch of the season. And I think them getting closer back to their defensive identity has been probably the biggest proponent. And the fact that, some of their offense is kind of, you're seeing the some of the ways that like you have all these different offensive options. Now you're seeing it come to life a little bit more. I think it's a little bit more organized right now with, the roles like Terry coming off the bench. Not that he's been awesome, but I think it has helped other things go into place offensively, right? The Terry thing is still not great, but I think that was one thing. And Jovic coming out of the rotation, like there's been I think some cutting here, right? And I think Spo has kind of figured out where he wants guys to be and what roles he wants them to play.
Well, there's been some cutting, but there's also been an ad, and so some of the cutting is injury related. Larson has been hurt. We'll talk about whether or not he gets his role back when he's fully healthy. But Jovic has been healthy. J. Rich has been healthy enough, and these are both guys who were in the rotation not too long ago. I mean, Jovic was a starter to start the season. Then J. Rich worked his way back, was in the rotation. Burks was in and out of the rotation, and has not been playing lately. So the lean into offense has not really been there in terms of the rotation pieces that Spo is using, and yet they've now broken into the top 10 in offensive rating in the league. So actually him leaning defense, and I want to make this case as we talk about Dru here a little bit, is that I do feel like when they settle things down defensively, they play better offense. Like we always talk about their offense bleeding into their defense. Jimmy talks about that a lot. When we don't make shots, we sometimes don't defend. And we've seen that over the course of this build. But I do think there's also something to the idea of when they are getting their core principles right defensively, and also when they're forcing turnovers, getting themselves easy baskets, getting into early offense, that the offense gets better. When they're more connected on one end of the floor, it leads into the other. And so I do think that their better defense has been helping the offense. And this is where I get to Dru. And I think I didn't have time to go through this to make sure this was the case, but it sure seemed like last night, and we're recording this on Monday, it sure seemed like last night Spo made sure he had either Highsmith or Dru Smith on the floor at all times, one or the other. I know it's not perfect because Dru's not coming in for Highsmith, but just the way the rotations are working out and the fact that he's been closing lately with Dru. He closed with Dru even while having Hero and Rozier on the floor. We never considered that early in the season. We said if you're gonna close with Hero and Rozier, then you need to play Haywood with them. But he basically played Dru with them last night, and he's getting results with it. And I think we talk about things that are sort of transient during the season that are going to change. Rotation pieces are going to change. I think the thing that's going to stay the same now, though, is I think he's going to lean into defense with the rotations a little bit more. And I know it's crazy to say that when he's starting Hero and Robinson, but again, he put Highsmith in there to protect him. And I think if you're going to call, say, Jimmy a plus defender, which I think you can still when he's engaged, when he's not, no. But it is this idea we've talked about since the very beginning of this build, Alex, where you have to have 3 defenders on the floor at a time. If you don't, this thing falls apart. When they've gone to 2, they've had trouble. And now by putting Dru out there with Bam and Jimmy, or putting Highsmith out there with Bam and Jimmy, you're essentially covering yourself, and you're making it that you're not leaning so heavily on it. But I want to get to you specifically on what Dru has done, because this is really pretty remarkable. It's why we want to have him on the podcast this year. He's a totally unassuming guy. Most people have not heard him speak in the Heat fan base. Like, they wanted me to play the video yesterday.
I'm not sure I have.
Right. Well, we did. Yeah. Well, I did yesterday because he brought him into the room with Bam. And then, of course, Bam was asked, what's been the difference in you guys winning lately? And he said Dru. And Dru was like, no, don't say that. I mean, he comes in basically wearing like a plaid flannel shirt. Like, he is very unassuming, regular guy. I've said before that if he, a part of this is he doesn't look the part. He doesn't look the part of an NBA player necessarily. I think that, again, he's cut the hair. Okay, he's still wearing an undershirt. Like, he doesn't look like your typical, but he's getting results. And I think that part of what fans were reacting to was, again, that he didn't necessarily look the part of an elite athlete or anything else along those lines. But it's also, he's made improvements. Oh, yeah. Like, and I want to speak to you specifically about the shot, because the defense has been there. Like, we talked from the very beginning, we're like, okay, he can handle point of attack defense. Okay. Maybe he doesn't have elite quickness, but he moves his feet well. Mm-hmm. He's in the right position. He has very active hands. We've noticed that. He's very active hands. But the shot looked broken when we would watch it. Like, I remember last year at FAU, like, what is that form? It doesn't look, I don't know. Has he quickened his release? Has he tightened it? I'm not sure. But I asked you that question. But he's shooting over 50% from 3. I mean, he's at least keeping teams honest, even if it's not at high volume.
Yeah, no doubt. I agree with you. Like, the defense has always been there, but it's funny you mentioned like the offensive improvements. I feel like he's continued to have gotten better on defense, just like with the more reps. Like, I thought he's always been pretty solid at the point of attack there. And like you mentioned, right, you said it great. Like, it's not like he's like so quick and agile, but he's not so quick, but he is agile, is what I meant to say. And he's great at, recognizing how to angle his body to get around screens and, stay physical without fouling. Not only that, I think he's gotten better on defense in the way that like he can really make plays, right? And that's without me checking the numbers. I'm not looking at like steal percentage or anything like that. This is just straight eye test observations. It feels like he's making more plays on the defensive end now, and I think that comes with like the confidence that he's probably gotten in himself, getting to play more. And it's just like, okay, I've got a little bit more free reign to gamble a little bit. And I don't think that he's doing like Jimmy level gambling where it's like really risky. But I think just knowing that, okay, like this spot is mine, at least for the night, like he knows, okay, I'm going to play my game, right? Like, I'm going to make the other team feel me on defense. And I think he's done an incredible job of that. Like, he's been probably like, I think after Bam and then probably after Haywood, he's right there. I think he's been that good on defense. I think he hasn't been that far from what Haywood gives you. Obviously, Haywood is bigger and can guard more wings. So there's a big difference there. But as far as defensive impact for what they're doing, I think Dru has been right there in kind of the time that he's been given. And you're right, the offense has come to life. I don't think it's like, okay, now he's this huge offensive threat. I think there's still times like there's still a couple shots here and there. I'm like, okay, I don't know if that was the shot, but he can make an open three. He can make a pass. He's not like a fantastic passer by any means, but he's just like he can be a connector out there. The ball doesn't need to be running through him, but he can make a pass as a point guard. But I think you mentioned this earlier in the show, like it's not that he's the new backup point guard. It's that he is the backup defender with Larson off the floor. Because I felt like Spo was really impressed with Larson's defense. And theoretically, Larson was supposed to give you a little bit more offense. And I think we've seen, I think Larson has been great, absolutely great as a cutter. Like he's been fantastic there. I think the shooting can still be better. And I think he's one of those guys where like you're going to try to up his volume as time goes on because the form is nice, right? Not that you want him being like a pull-up guy, but in general, what I'm trying to say is the difference between Dru and Haywood, not that big on the defensive end as far as what they've done, right? And then on offense with the Larson thing, I've been a big proponent of Larson playing, but I will say the difference between Larson and Dru on offense has not been that big either. Like it was kind of expected to be. And I was somebody who was questioning why Dru had a two-way spot before the start of the season, even though I deferred that, like, yeah, his defense is very strong and they could use another point of attack defender. I just wasn't sure with him coming off the injury how he was going to look, and with the offense being kind of a question mark. So yeah, I think he's done a fantastic job. He's shown, honestly, he looks better on both ends. And I've got numbers here, but we can get into that later.
Well, no, I want to mention some. I'm sure you got better numbers than I do, but I just want to throw a couple things out here because there's enough of a sample size now to say, okay, he's obviously making a difference when he's on the floor. And I actually like the fact that he's not that developed offensively because they don't need that. Like they don't need. See, this is the whole thing. Like this team is going to go as far as its core three take them. Okay, it's always been the case, but it's a question of putting guys around them that complement them and make them better and help them connect. And Haywood does that from a defensive perspective. Duncan does that from an offensive perspective. He unlocks things for them. Dru is becoming that next guy, and that's why certain guys are getting left in the dust, because I don't know right now at this stage that Jovic does it. I don't know that Jaquez does it. That's going to be an interesting conversation. We get that on the other side about when Larson comes back. Is it actually Jaquez's minutes that he might take instead of Dru's minutes? Dru just doesn't get in the way. Like he brings up the ball, he gets off it. And of course, there was the one sequence in the game last night where he has the two offensive rebounds, and then Jimmy rewards him with a pass to the corner, and he makes the three. And that was basically the play of the day. And you can see the trust level developing in them. And even Rozier said last night, when he's asked about Dru, he says, Spo's going to play guys who defend. Like they have noticed because he's giving them hell in practice on a regular basis. And although he's not that quick and he's not that tall, he's kind of built, like he's physically built. Like he's tough to get around. Okay. Like he uses his body effectively. It's a big difference watching him defend as opposed to watching Rozier defend, for instance. It's not necessarily about arm length or any of those things that we talk about with him. It's just he's hard to move, and he doesn't give up his spot. He doesn't stop moving his body. I want to get to, on the other side, you'll get to some more specific numbers, but I'll just tease this. I mean, right now, if you just look at the numbers on stats.nba.com, I mean, his defensive rating of the players who played minutes this year, it's the best. I mean, 98.3. I know this is flawed because of who he plays with, but his net rating, his on-off numbers are all excellent. I mean, his net rating is plus 7.6, and again, he's played with all kinds of different guys now through his first 9 games. And in every single one of them, you're like, okay, like he's giving you good minutes. We saw it in the preseason also. And we both say this as people who questioned at the beginning why they were even giving him another shot after the injury last year. And I know there were folks in the front office who weren't necessarily sold on it as of a few months ago, but were deferring to Spo because a lot of people didn't think Gabe Vincent was an NBA player to begin with either. And actually, Dru is different defensively than Gabe. He's not like Gabe was like a pit bull, but I just feel like Gabe's defense slipped a little bit before he left. Dru is, I think, giving it more consistently. I think Gabe is a more natural shooter than Dru. Has a little bit more to his offensive game than Dru does, but I actually think Dru has the potential to be a better defender for this system than even Gabe was. I want you to get to some more numbers on the other side of this. Before we do, want to mention a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, our friends over at Real Estate Shop. You can find them at Real Estate Shop. That's with 2 P's and an E, realestateshopfl.com. This is Javier and Amanda. They service the entire Tri-County area. They're based here in Broward County. They just give you the best sort of hands-on experience. If you're selling or buying a house, definitely reach out to them. They'll make you feel like family. Again, they're honest. They'll ask you exactly what it is that you need. They're not in this for them. They're in this for you and to make sure that you get the best possible deal. So check them out at realestateshopfl.com or the Fort Lauderdale Realtor on Instagram. And I'm mentioning them again now because I will tell you, our guy Javier Iglesias, who is obviously a part owner of a real estate shop, he was on with me 2 weeks ago. We have the sponsor segment, a corner segment, and he suggested Dru Smith should start. That was 2 weeks ago, and he's not looking so crazy right now. I don't think that's where this is heading at the moment. Would it surprise me if he got a spot start if Duncan, say, missed the game? No. I think that's how well he complements their three. All right, before we get out of here, give me some numbers, and then we're gonna ponder that question on what happens when Larson is back. Is Jaquez the odd man out?
So because I've definitely got thoughts on that. I'm not addressing that right now, but as far as the numbers, right? I did a little deep dive here into Dru's defensive numbers, and I was mentioning earlier how I feel like he's done more defensive playmaking. I got to be fair here. His steals percentage every season he's been in the league, which of course the last two for him, like it was not that much time. But to be fair, the time he was on the floor, he's had an elite, as in 90th percentile or higher steals percentage all 3 seasons of his career. The other thing that I did not expect to see, 86 percentile block percentage for Dru. And that's not even like, of course, like I know sometimes the steals and blocks can get like the way that the stats people get him down can sometimes be confusing, like what's a steal versus what's a block. But just in general, he is a defensive playmaker. Like the stats just kind of confirm the eye test there. Not only that, he's giving you an 85th percentile defensive estimated plus minus, which is fantastic. Was in 98th and 97th percentile the 2 seasons before. Again, very little time. But again, what he's showing you is that like in that little time, he can really, really defend, right? Then you look at kind of just what the Heat are doing when he's on the floor, right? You mentioned some of those stats, but they've got a 99 defensive rating and are a plus 10 overall, plus 10 net rating, I should say, which is points per 100 possessions with Dru on. So like opponents are just, when he's on the floor, they're going to score at a worse rate. That's pretty much what this all comes down to. Like they're shooting 47% from 2, opponents are, when Dru is on the floor. So every little number that I've looked up here is pretty much confirmed, right? Like usually defensive stats can be kind of murky, but when they're all telling you like, yeah, this guy's really, really good, right? When the on-off numbers are telling you they're defending much better with him on, you got to take like you got to take it for what it's worth. And then you've got also like other numbers here, right? Like they haven't played Dru and Haywood much together, and they haven't played Dru and Pell that much together. But those, like in the little time that those 2 units have seen time, like, they're defending the hell out of the ball. Like they're just much better when they've got some of their defensive specialists on the floor together, which of course makes sense, right? I just feel like what you're seeing here, and you were mentioning it, it's like Spo valuing these guys a little bit more rotation wise. He's giving these guys a more consistent leash. Where like Haywood earlier in the season was getting DMPs, and of course Dru hasn't been in the rotation every night either. So like I think now that it's like, okay, Haywood is starting. Not only was he not getting DMPs anymore, he's a starter, and they're doing great with him as a starter. And you've got Dru coming off. And before, when Larson was in the lineup, it was him instead, and he was giving you strong defense. So I think like everything kind of points to that is, these guys are getting value more because you're trying to make this work with more shot creators than you had in the past in this era. And I think the way to make it work is to have just guys who play the role around them. Like, right? It seems like so obvious, but it's true. Like you need guys like Haywood, you need guys like Larson and Dru who are just going to give you everything they've got on the defensive end and take on the hard matchups and do that stuff, because Jimmy doesn't want to do it all the time. Like he might do it, throughout a game at times, but to have that primary matchup and to do that hard work, possession after possession after possession, not to get into a whole Mike Brown thing and say it 22 more times. But I caught
22 more times? How many times did he say it? I thought he said the Sacramento coach. Like, oh my God.
I can confirm it was 20 plus. That was hilarious.
Suppose never even had a press conference long enough to encapsulate all of the Mike Brown possessions by possessions. Well, no, I'm with you, and I think this is what we're talking about: is that they need glue guys. I mean,
By the way,
and we're. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Haywood also, like, the defensive stats for him are insane. 97th percentile in steals percentage, was 90th and 96. I'm sorry, not steals percentage. I was looking at the wrong one. And in defensive estimated plus minus. So in the 3 seasons that, like, Haywood, including this season, Haywood has been like a staple in the rotation, or like close to it. 97th, 90th, and 96th percentiles in defensive estimated plus minus. Like, it's kind of confirming what we've been saying. It's like these guys can really defend, and with Jimmy not wanting to do it all the time, like, they're valuable pieces for this team.
Well, and that's the thing about trusting Spo on some of these developmental projects, because particularly the defensive ones, because we said a lot of the same things about Haywood that we said about Dru now. Oh, he's got a ceiling, he's an occasional player, he's not really a rotation player. These were things we were saying about Haywood at the beginning. Whereas I think with Caleb, with Strus, some of the ones that lean offense, maybe we see it a little quicker. Gabe came in more as a defensive player, but he was also a scorer in college.
Max also struggled at the beginning.
And Max did struggle
in the preseason. He was really tough. I mean, rough.
Well, Duncan struggled at the very beginning too, but I think it was particularly with the defensive ones, we put a cap on them, and they just take a little bit longer again because the offensive stuff is the stuff that's going to flash. But if Dru can simply make if he takes an open 3-pointer, like we talked about this with Kyle last year, like he just had to take the shots. And Kyle obviously had experience as being a big game shot maker and all the rest of that, but he refused to shoot. If Dru will just take those shots when they're open, as Haywood has learned to do it, then the minutes are there. We're going to need more time for this another time because unfortunately I have a tight window on this one. But it's something to think about, and maybe we'll get into it more on on one of our stage shows. So we should do that. Well, you know what? Let's preview that on the Off the Floor stage show. Who's the guy that loses minutes to Dru? Okay, so we'll throw this out there, and then we're going to clip it. Okay, here we go. Does Larson not get back in the rotation? Already Burks and Jay Rich seem like they're kind of, and Jovic seem like they've been pushed aside. The big question, though, is Jaquez. The big question is Jaquez, because if Larson's going to defend the way he defended, and Jaime is having like one good game out of 3, we'll leave it for the Off the Floor stage show. Click on the link, subscribe. You can challenge us on all of that good stuff. I want to thank our sponsors, Real Estate Shop, FL.com. Shout out to Javier. He called the Dru Smith thing. And also our friends over at Underdog. Use the code 5.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.